Hello everyone, my name is Bryn Hakkelman, and today I will be talking to you about our paper on titled Fairness versus Welfare, a Hybrid Congestion Aftermarket. So maybe first, let's talk a little bit about congestion management or congestion in power networks in general. So with the energy transition, we are increasingly seeing network flow congestion occurring in power networks. It occurs even at low and medium voltage levels now, because we have this complex mix of consumers and producers and this new type of user that has been dubbed prosumers. This transition from a supply follows demand to a demand follows supply paradigm that we can see, for example, in demand side management, um, as consequences for how the users interact with the network. And especially, it places the consequence of congestion increasingly with the individual prosumers. Now, this is a very good reason to explicitly incorporate fairness in congestion management, because now the individual prosumers are finding these consequences of congestion directly. We have to think about what is fair, how to distribute the available capacity among these users. Okay, so our contributions of this from this paper, we propose a novel hybrid congestion management mechanism that allows agents to claim their fair share while maximizing welfare for others. So I'll come back to what hybrid means and also come back to what fair share means. We also propose a congestion aftermarket for our hybrid congestion management mechanism that lets users locally trade access to capacity. So we'll let users trade access to the capacity that they have among themselves locally. Finally, we proved that our congestion aftermarket is budget balanced and participating in it is individually rational from a welfare perspective. So budget balance is important because it means that the redistribution of capacity really is local completely. And individual rationality from a welfare perspective is interesting because it's a nice property to have. Individual rationality means that it's beneficial for agents to participate in this aftermarket. But we'll also see that the welfare perspective is maybe not the only perspective that you could take. Okay, let's go to the model. We take a modeling approach that is similar to the literature to lay the theoretical foundations for congestion management. That means, for example, by focusing on active power curtailment. So we look at acyclic networks, which we call congestion trees. Agents have desired presumptions, what they want to do, and they are located at the vertices of these networks. We have flow capacity constraints on the edges, the power lines of the network. And congestion solutions, they allocate presumptions to these agents. So maybe based on the desired presumptions, there is some congestion occurring, and a congestion solution is an allocation that allocates a different set of presumptions to those agents so that a congestion does not occur. This is a figure representing like a schematic of the model like this. So what we see here is like the entire network and like a smaller sub network highlighted here in the dotted triangle. As you can see, there's vertex marked R in the top left with some dots leading up, which signifies a connection to a higher level network. And so what we're seeing here is a local network. And so at these vertices, there may be some agents having some presumption. And on these lines, we have capacity constraints. And now all the presumptions of the agents under a line, they induce the flow over that line. And this is what causes congestion if the flow exceeds the capacity. So a pretty abstract model, but a very nice model for most of these networks. So we have a local model for radial networks in particular. Agents, they submit demand curves to a higher level network. So like a larger scale network than the one that we're particularly looking at. And the higher level price, P hat, determines the desired presumptions, right? So based on the market clearing that happens in the higher level network, there we get a price, P hat, and that then feeds back to the demand curves that the agents have submitted to result in their desired presumptions. So we assume that agents in the local network are price takers in the higher level markets. So usually these higher level markets are very much like orders of magnitude larger than the local networks that we're looking at. So this price P hat is just something that the agents observe and have no real influence on, even though they submit demand curves themselves, but they are too small to make a difference. So these desired presumptions that come out of this, they can cause congestion locally because these higher level networks, the higher level markets, they don't necessarily take into account the local capacity constraints, of course. So trading in this higher level market may cause local congestion, which is the situation that we are interested in looking at. So congestion solution, they allocates to each agent in the local network a presumption such that no congestion occurs as a whole. Right, so all the agents are being allocated something that maybe differs from their desired presumptions, so that the system as a whole, with all the new allocated presumptions, does not cause congestion. Okay, let's talk about some of the words in the title of the paper, fair allocations and welfare maximizing allocations. So we'll start with the fair allocations. So there are various notions of fairness, for example, equitable fairness, proportional, non-discriminatory, a plethora. And the notion of fairness can define a fair allocation, right? So one of these allocations that's going to solve congestion might be produced based on a rule of that is distilled from a notion of fairness. And as such, this fair allocation defines then for each agent their fair share, right? So in the context of this particular notion of fairness that was chosen, we can say that what was allocated to the agents is the fair share in this sense. So our work is compatible with any notion of fairness, and we only need these fair shares, right? So we're not going to go into different notions of fairness. We just assume that a notion of fairness has been picked, and this then defines fair shares. And with these fair shares, we can work. In examples in this presentation and in the paper, we will use equitable fairness as the fairness, which just means that agents are allocated equally. We'll see that in a moment. Okay, now the other type of allocations are the welfare maximizing allocations, and these are usually quite popular in these situations. So we look at welfare in the utilitarian sense, so basically just the surplus of all the prosumers acting at the market price P hat. And we have an algorithm to compute these welfare maximizing allocations that's kind of similar to previous work, so I'll go over it quickly. So it's locally similar to locational marginal pricing. We set the marginal to resolve congestion. So in locational marginal pricing, an actual price is set. We just look at the demand curves and use a single marginal to set the presumptions of the agents. And in this way, just like with locational marginal pricing, we will find a solution that maximizes welfare. With this local approach, we can locally define what we call congestion bounds. So that we bound the demand curves based on the constraints in the local set, and then we can go up in levels in the local network that we're looking at for the next congestion problem, the next line that might be congested, and we can use these bounded demand curves as input for that, and in this way we can very easily find a solution for the entire network. So important here to note is that maximal surplus allocations are independent of the price P hat. So even though the surplus does depend on the price, of course, the allocation that maximizes the surplus is independent of the price. So we're changing the marginals to find this maximal surplus allocation, and to do that, we do not necessarily have to actually set a price, which is important. So this figure here shows one of these bounded demand curves that I was talking about. So essentially, what you can see here is based on the local capacity constraints. We have found with a small algorithm the maximal and minimal values that this particular agent can take with their presumption to stay within the congestion bounds. And we do this for all simultaneously for all the agents in the location. And then as we move up through the network, we'll fine-tune these bounds. So again, there's this picture. So we would for example, find these bounded curves in the area highlighted by the dotted triangle, and then move up to the next capacity line and compute the new bounded demand curves there. Okay, so now interesting, what we can do is we can find a sort of hybrid allocation that is based on optionally claiming a fair share. So before anything happens, any agent A can choose to claim their fair share. So they indicate, oh, I would like to claim my fair share when it comes down to it. So then if congestion occurs, we just use the welfare maximizing mechanism to find an allocation. But first, we compute the fair allocation that defines these fair shares for each agent, in particular an agent A that chose to claim their fair share. So then before running the mechanism to find the welfare maximizing allocation, we fix this fair share for the agent A that chose, or any agents A that chose to claim their fair share. And what the result is then, we have these agents that indicated they wanted to claim their fair share. They actually are allocated their fair share in the end, while for the rest of the agents, we still maximize the welfare using the same mechanism as before. And I can illustrate it here why it's so easy to implement this, because we had this approach where we reduce these curves with bounds iteratively over time as we move up in the local network. So what we do for the fair shares is we just, for those agents that choose to claim their fair share, we just initialize these at the fixed fair share. So then as we move up the tree, we'll all the time every time we will adjust the bounds, but the upper and lower bound for this particular agent is fixed, so it will never change, which for the rest does not affect our algorithm at all. So it's very compatible with this. So we're still using the welfare maximizing mechanism, but we're just priming it with fair shares for certain agents that have chosen to do so. That brings us to the congestion aftermarket. The difference between the hybrid allocation and the fair allocation can be interpreted as a sort of set of trades. All right, so we first set the fair allocation, and then from there, we move towards a hybrid allocation with some agents staying at their fair allocation and some agents moving towards the welfare maximizing allocations. And so these movements, they can be interpreted as trades. So we devise a pricing scheme that assigns a price to this difference, to this movement. And this is particular for each individual agent. For agents that choose to claim their fair share, this will be 0 because the difference will also be 0. They will just stay at their fair share. We prove that this pricing scheme is budget balanced, which means that it's a completely local internal market, essentially, where capacity is traded between the agents, which is very different from, for example, locational marginal pricing. And the other important property that we prove is individual rationality. So it is, in an economical or a welfare-oriented sense, it is optimal for an agent to participate in this pricing, in this aftermarket, because the pricing scheme is such that the gain that the agent will gain from participating is less than the price that they pay, or it's more than the price that they pay. So essentially the aftermarket is a way to redistribute capacity from a fair starting point, right? This fair starting point is the fair shares. And then we allow agents to pay a price to move themselves towards a more welfare optimal solution for themselves by paying, actually having transactions with the other agents in the same locality. I won't go into the whole proof of all of this, but I will just highlight one part of this because it might be slightly interesting and insightful, which is the congestion regions, right? So actually what we see is that when congestion occurs, for example, when like a positive congestion occurs is what we call, we define a consumption to be positive. So that means that there is a consumption exceeding a capacity constraint, that then in the region behind this congested line, that is all consumption congestion then, until we reach a different line where there is a production congestion. And so why this matters is that for the aftermarket, basically agents can only trade capacities with other agents in the same congestion regions, because if an agent cannot re-trade with an agent in a different congestion region, because there is an intermediate congested line somewhere in between them that will prevent this trade from happening. I mean, if the trade would be allowed, it would cause congestion at that intermediate line. So basically, within these regions where multiple agents are contributing to the same congested line, that is where they can redistribute capacity among themselves using the aftermarket. Right, then I would like to illustrate the transitions that we've talked about so far, because so far I've talked about the first being the demand curves to the higher level market, which sets the price P hat, which you can see here on the right, which is the horizontal dotted line. And based on this, so I want to focus on the left-hand side of this picture, actually, on these two consumers, A1 and B1. So based on this, this price P hat, they have desired productions here, these DA1 and DB1. However, this causes congestion in the local network, so we can compute a fair allocation, which is in this case the equitable one, that allocates these indicated values to both of these agents. It's, as you can see, it's the same production. I mean, it's the equitable allocation, so it would indeed allocate the same production to both of these agents. And then afterwards, they can trade in the aftermarket, which would lead them to the hybrid solution. So they both participate in the aftermarket. So one agent pays the other to move some capacity from one to the other, and they end up at these hybrid allocated points with some transaction in the middle in the aftermarket. So it's interesting to see here is the change from horizontal alignment to vertical to horizontal, because of horizontal alignment means that the marginals or the prices are the same, while horizontal means that the presumptions are the same, right? And so this welfare or surplus is maximized when all the agents are on the same marginal, while, for example, equitable fairness is maximized when they are the same presumption. It's interesting, you can see it so clearly here in this picture, moving between the different options. So a different option, if the agents would have chosen to not participate in the aftermarket, they would have just stayed at their fair allocations, claiming their fair shares. So here's a little overview of what's been going on so far. So first, the agents in the local network and like the rest of the higher level network, they submit all these demand curves, goes into the market clearing mechanism, and out of this comes the higher level price P hat. So then this feeds back to the demand curves in our local network and determines their desired presumptions based on this price. Then if no congestion occurs, then we go to the right there, then everything is fine, and the agents, they just trade this this presumption at the established price P hat. But if the congestion does occur, we compute the fair solution. This basically curtails all the agents towards their allocated fair share, which they still receive at the higher level market price P hat. And then an agent can choose one of two things, either to keep that fair share. Remember, they choose this beforehand. So they keep the fair share, which in the end will just allocate, will mean that they receive that fair share at the market price P hat. Or the agent can participate in the aftermarket, which means they will get the original, the fair share at the price P hat, but they will also get the difference at this individual price PA. So essentially, they're still getting the fair share at the original market price, but they're either gaining or selling a small portion of that at a different price that is that will be paid to other agents in the same region. So that will stay with, that's the budget balance that will stay within this local area. And then in the end, we have our hybrid solution with this aftermarket pricing. So last thing I want to go over with shortly is with you is an example. So this is an example where we have three agents as three consumers actually, A, B, and C, and they are just located at the single vertex and they share a capacity of 15. It's a very simple example. So here on the right, you can see a table that at the top has some different allocations, and the leftmost one, which is just labeled Y, is actually uh, the original allocation if no local constraints would be there, like there's no local congestion. You can see what the desired consumptions are of these three agents at the higher level market price, which is in this case just 1. And you can see that they would together consume a total of 25 units. However, they share this capacity constraint of 15 units, so that would cause congestion. So then now there were different ways to resolve this, different allocation that we can look at. And we're going to compare a little bit with the locational marginal pricing solution, which essentially just raises the price until congestion disappears, right? So the price is raised to 3 in this case, which reduces the total consumption to 15. But as you can see, it also increases the total payment to quite a lot relatively to what it was before. And this payment is made somewhere, right? This is a budget imbalance. It's not immediately clear where this extra payment will go to, probably the owner of the network. On the other hand, we have the fair solution, which just allocates the same value, 5, you can see there, to all the agents. So now the consumption is also reduced to 15, and they still pay the original price. But so we can improve on this situation in a welfare sense, which agents B and C will do. Agent A will claim their fair share, and agents B and C will participate in the aftermarket. And what you see then is on the left there, you can see their marginal functions. You can see indicated by these arrows the trade that they make, right? So at a price of 4, they trade 1 unit, and this increases their welfare. You can see here these dotted areas what the welfare increases for both of them, and half for one and a quarter for the other. And also from a perspective of the local network in general, you can see basically the surplus gain is the green hatched area on the right, and the surplus loss is the purple hatched area. And you can still see that the net gain in surplus is, again, of course, sums up to this 0.5 and 0.25. And in the end, the rightmost column in the table, you can see the allocation when all 3 of the agents participate in the aftermarket, and you can see that there indeed we find the same allocation as the locational marginal pricing does, 258, but with internal payments, right? So we have a budget balance, and we still indeed only pay 15 for the total. While you can see that agent A is getting paid by the others to give up some of its capacity. Right, so to conclude, we propose a novel hybrid congestion management mechanism that allows agents to claim their fair share while maximizing welfare for others. We also propose a congestion aftermarket for a hybrid congestion management mechanism that lets users locally trade access to capacity. And finally, we prove that our congestion aftermarket is budget balanced, and participating in it is individually rational from a welfare perspective. Thank you for listening.